Everything you've been told about the apex predator of the Cretaceous is a total lie. For over a century, museums have crowned Tyrannosaurus rex as the undisputed king of the dinosaurs, the ultimate killing machine, the most terrifying predator to ever walk the earth. But here's what they didn't tell you. In 2003, in the ancient bone beds of Madagascar, and later confirmed in the badlands of Montana, paleontologists unearthed fossil evidence so disturbing, so brutal, it forced a complete scientific reassessment of what we thought we knew about prehistoric predation. These bones belonged to creatures that didn't just hunt. They didn't just kill. They consumed their own kind. Meet Majungasaurus crenatissimus from Madagascar, a 21-foot, 2-ton cannibal with a scarred skull and jaws designed for one thing, tearing through bone. And its North American cousin, Daspletosaurus torosus, a 10-ton nightmare from Montana that bore the scars of combat with its own species, and whose bones show clear evidence it was eaten by another tyrannosaur after death. These weren't accidents. These weren't acts of mercy. This was survival at its most savage. And the evidence is written in stone, literally on the bones themselves. Today, you're going to witness the science that shattered the myth of the T-Rex. You're going to see why size wasn't the only rule in the Cretaceous. And you're going to meet the monsters that made their own families their prey. Let's start with Majungasaurus, the first dinosaur with undeniable proof of cannibalism. Around 70 to 66 million years ago, just before the asteroid impact that ended the dinosaur age, Madagascar wasn't the wildlife paradise we know today. It was an isolated island ecosystem, cut off from the mainland, where resources were scarce. Competition was deadly, and survival meant making impossible choices. Majungasaurus was the apex predator here. But apex meant something different on an island with limited prey. There were sauropods, yes, but not enough. Not for a 2-ton carnivore with a metabolism that demanded constant fuel. In 2007, paleontologist Dr. Raymond Rogers published findings that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. His team had discovered numerous Majungasaurus bones, ribs, femurs, vertebrae, all bearing the same chilling signature: deep, V-shaped grooves, puncture marks, bite and drag traces. And when they measured the spacing of those tooth marks, they matched perfectly with Majungasaurus teeth. Not scavenging by some other predator, not post-mortem damage. Majungasaurus was eating Majungasaurus. Now, here's where the science gets brutal. Tooth marks on fossil bones are like fingerprints. They tell us who bit, how hard, and whether the victim was alive or dead. Dr. Rogers' team identified 3 types of evidence on the Majungasaurus bones. 1. Puncture marks, deep, circular holes where teeth penetrated the bone. These occur when a predator bites down with crushing force. Majungasaurus had a bite force estimated at 3,000 to 4,000 pounds per square inch. Not as strong as T-Rex, but more than enough to crack through bone. 2. Score marks, long, parallel scratches where teeth dragged across bone as the predator tore away flesh. The spacing between these scores, identical to the serrations on Majungasaurus teeth. 3. Bite and drag marks, asymmetrical gouges showing the predator gripped and pulled, trying to dismember the carcass. But here's the critical detail. Not all of these bones came from fresh kills. Some showed healed injuries, meaning the victim survived the attack. Others showed no signs of healing, suggesting they were scavenged after death. This tells us Majungasaurus engaged in both intraspecific combat, fights between members of the same species, and post-mortem feeding. They fought each other, and when one died, the survivors ate it. Why? Resource scarcity. On an island with limited prey, other Majungasaurus weren't competition. They were food. But Majungasaurus wasn't alone in this dark behavior. Fast forward to 1994. Dinosaur Provincial Park, Alberta, Canada, one of the richest fossil sites in North America. Paleontologist Dr. Philip Curry and his team uncovered the remains of a juvenile Daspletosaurus, a close cousin of T-Rex and one of the largest tyrannosaurs. This animal was about 20 feet long, weighed roughly 1,100 pounds, and was probably around 10 years old, not fully grown. Not yet the apex predator it was born to be, and its life was a war zone. Dr. David Hone of Queen Mary University of London examined the skull and found something extraordinary. This juvenile Daspletosaurus bore over a dozen healed injuries, all consistent with tyrannosaur bites. Let's list them. A bite to the snout, fused bone showing the premaxilla, the tip of the upper jaw was crushed and healed. Punctures to the nasal bones, circular lesions 9 to 14 millimeters across, showing signs of infection and healing. A massive wound to the back of the head. A semicircular chunk of bone was bitten out, penetrating through the skull. The edges healed, but the damage was permanent. Multiple lesions on the maxilla, the upper jaw, including osteomyelitis, a bone infection caused by deep trauma. Damage to the dentary, the lower jaw, subcircular puncture wounds along the ventral margin. These weren't hunting injuries. They were face-biting wounds, a behavior documented in modern crocodiles and Komodo dragons during territorial combat and dominance displays. Adult tyrannosaurs fought by biting each other's skulls, and this juvenile, it survived multiple attacks. But here's where it gets darker. This Daspletosaurus eventually died. We don't know how. Disease, starvation, one fight too many. But we know what happened next. Dr. Hone's team found fresh bite marks on the mandible, bite marks that showed no healing, meaning they were inflicted after death. The tooth spacing, the shape of the punctures, the force required to penetrate the bone, all pointed to one culprit, another tyrannosaur. This wasn't combat, this was scavenging, or worse, cannibalism. A larger Daspletosaurus, possibly an adult, found the carcass of this juvenile and ate it. And this isn't an isolated case. In 2010, paleontologist Dr. Nicholas Longrich published evidence of Tyrannosaurus rex bones bearing T-Rex tooth marks. In 2020, a study of the Mygat Moor Quarry in Colorado found that 28% of Allosaurus bones bore bite marks from other Allosaur.
The myth of the Tyrannosaurus rex as the undisputed, honorable king of the dinosaurs is a total lie. For decades, academia and Hollywood have polished the image of the T-Rex as a majestic apex predator, the noble lion of the Cretaceous, but the fossil record tells a much darker story. Modern paleontology has performed a cold, forensic reassessment of the ancient world, and the truth they didn't tell you is far more savage. Everything you know is wrong. We aren't looking at a kingdom. We're looking at a prehistoric crime scene. New fossil discoveries have exposed predators that were more brutal, more desperate, and more efficient than the T-Rex. These weren't just hunters, they were opportunistic terminators that shattered every biological taboo to stay alive. We are talking about the rise of the 10-ton cannibals. Meet Majungasaurus crenatissimus, a 2-ton nightmare from the isolated island of Madagascar. While the T-Rex enjoyed the bountiful floodplains of North America, Majungasaurus was trapped in a biological pressure cooker. 70 million years ago, Madagascar was an arid, resource-depleted hellscape. In this ecosystem, the rules of nature weren't just bent, they were obliterated. The evidence is etched into the very marrow of their bones. Dr. Raymond Rogers and his team uncovered a treasure trove of Majungasaurus remains that looked like they had been through an industrial meat grinder. This wasn't the work of scavengers or the slow decay of time. These bones bore the chilling signature of intraspecific predation. Using high-resolution forensic analysis, researchers identified deep, V-shaped grooves and puncture marks that acted as a dental fingerprint. When you align those grooves with the jagged, blade-like teeth of another Majungasaurus, the fit is perfect. This wasn't accidental. It was a systematic processing of a carcass. The bite and drag traces show a predator that didn't just kill, it disassembled its own kin, stripping every ounce of protein from the ribs and vertebrae. In a world of extreme scarcity, your neighbor wasn't a rival. They were a mobile pantry. But this wasn't just an island phenomenon. In the shadows of the T-Rex's own lineage lived Daspletosaurus turosus, a 10-ton titan of the Montana Badlands. If Majungasaurus was a desperate survivor, Daspletosaurus was a professional gladiator. Forensic autopsies on a juvenile specimen revealed a life defined by facial biting, a brutal form of ritualized combat where tyrannosaurs would grip each other's snouts in a test of raw power. This juvenile bore the scars of over a dozen deep tissue infections and circular lesions from these encounters. The most disturbing revelation, however, came after its death. Fresh, unhealed bite marks on the lower jaw proved that as soon as this animal hit the dirt, another tyrannosaur began to feed. There was no respect for the fallen. There was only the cold, hard logic of the calorie. We have to look at the physics of brutality to understand why these creatures evolved this way. While the T-Rex possessed a crushing bite force of 12,800 pounds per square inch, its cousin Daspletosaurus utilized a more surgical, puncture-pull feeding mechanic. They didn't need the T-Rex's overkill armor-crushing power because they weren't just hunting armored herbivores. They were adapted to hunt each other. This behavioral plasticity, the ability to switch from hunter to cannibal, is what made these theropods the true masters of the Cretaceous. They were biological opportunists. Whether it was the Mygot-Moore Quarry, where nearly a third of all Allosaurus bones show signs of being cannibalized during a prehistoric drought, or the bloodstained plains of Montana, the verdict is the same: adaptability is superior to size. The T-Rex may have been the largest, but the Majungasaurus and Daspletosaurus were the most ruthless. They proved that when the environment collapses and the prey disappears, family is just another word for survival. Size wasn't the law of the land. Hunger was. And in the savage reality of the prehistoric world, the ultimate predator wasn't the one who stood the tallest. It was the one willing to eat its own reflection to see another sunrise. The next time you look at a T-Rex in a museum, remember the secret they're hiding. Remember the 10-ton cannibals. Because in the end, the most terrifying monster isn't the one hunting you, it's the one that has already finished eating its own kind. Would you like me to write a specific deep dive into the autopsy of the Allosaurus from the Mygot-Moore Quarry next? And in a world where every meal could be your last, even family was on the menu. Subscribe to Extinct Exposed for more stories the museums won't tell you. End.